Guys, I'm happy to welcome back to the podcast our friend CJ Pearson. He's a PragerU personality, host of the weekly online news series, The Wrap Up. And you can follow him on social media at the CJ Pearson. Well, there's also, of course, at PragerU, which is the PragerU handle. CJ, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you. You're a bright and outspoken young conservative. You don't seem to hold back. And I thought I'd start by talking about, we have all this woke indoctrination in the schools and the universities. You somehow seem to have broken free of it or immunized yourself against it. Talk a little bit about how it is that you saw through it, and then what emboldened you to sort of become an intrepid challenger of woke orthodoxy.
Yeah, well, Dinesh, first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. And you hit on it. Every single educational institution across America is rampant with indoctrination. I often say that, you're not getting colleges teaching students how to think anymore. You're getting colleges teaching students what to think. But for me, I kind of had a little bit of a dry run of that growing up. I grew up in a household raised by my grandparents who were on the left. But just in a similar story that you see often in the Black community, they were pretty conservative. I grew up going to church every single Sunday. I grew up, learning about the importance of family and faith and also of fiscal conservatism. And when I first, got politically involved in the second grade, because we had a mock election for the 2008 election, I remember watching, that debate. I'm probably aging myself, but only as much as a 20-year-old possibly could. But I remember, sitting on the floor of my grandparents' bedroom, watching Candy Crowley moderate the debate between President Obama and then Senator John McCain. And just thinking that, what they were doing was really important. I had no idea what they were talking about. I was a 6 or 7-year-old kid, but I wanted to know more. And when I started looking into the platforms of conservatism and liberalism and all of those things, I realized that the values that my grandparents had instilled within me were conservative values. And a funny story about that is I later voted for John McCain in that mock election, a decision I don't know if I would replicate today. But I did in that election, and I came home and I told my grandparents, hey, I voted for John McCain. And they said something that I didn't quite understand then, but now understand a lot more. You must think that you're white. Implying that because of that decision, of course, I was acting white by voting Republican. And I had no idea what identity politics was, and definitely didn't believe the color of my skin should dictate my politics. But unfortunately, it's something that I've become well acquainted with in the years since. The way in which the left attempts to weaponize people's identity and use it to supplant their ability to think freely. And it's not something that I wanted to embrace. And it's actually something I actively reject.
Let's think about, CJ, when your grandparents said that to you. I want to now probe their psychology a little bit. And my guess is that the reason they thought that, of course, in going back, it wasn't that they were subjected to woke indoctrination. I think what happened with them is that they believed that an underdog community needs to have solidarity. It needs to come together. And so it became very easy for the left to convince a lot of blacks from the civil rights generation that a single point of view is a necessary way, because we sort of have to be, locked in our arms as we march down, in Birmingham or Selma or Montgomery. And so the whites are on the one side and the blacks are on the other. Now, in my view, this was always a bit of an illusion. Martin Luther King always had massive support among whites in the North. The media, of course, largely white, was very much on the side of the civil rights movement. So the civil rights movement was never an exclusively black cause, but it may be that this is the roots of, and then of course identity politics has picked up on this and now turned, it seems, race and not to mention gender and transgender into a virtual sacrament. I mean, has it disturbed you the degree to which we've seen that kind of hardening or reification that's occurred in our culture?
Completely. And it's just it's so detached from reality that it's almost nonsensical, right? You're talking about, the Black community specifically voting 93% of the time for an ideology that doesn't seemingly care about us at all. Look at the state of Black America and every single inner city in America that has been almost exclusively ran by progressive politicians for decades. And look at what's happening in Chicago. Look at what's happening in Detroit. Look at what's happening in all of those cities. You see crime, you see destitution, you see poverty, you see failing schools. I recently did a story here at PragerU about how 55 schools in Chicago had students who weren't proficient in either math or reading. This is a reality that I think that we have to really just come to terms with. Do we deserve better? And I think we do. And we should stop selling for less and start selling for more. But yeah, to your point, it's so interesting to me how the left has really been able to gaslight a significant portion of the American people into believing and actively voting against their interests. Because at the end of the day, you can take this message to the Black people that you care about them, you fight about them, and all of those things. But the reality has never really given that impression. And I think that at the end of the day, I think we deserve more as a community. And it's conservatives who have been giving more to the Black community. It's never been the left, historically and today.
I mean, my view of identity politics is that those identities that are highlighted by the left are in fact part of the wider ensemble of identities that we all have, right? Because we have multiple identities in the world. And I don't just mean that we are individuals or Americans or Black, where we have different roles and responsibilities as a son or a brother or a husband. So we have all these different roles and identities. Interestingly, the left appears to oppose the identities that they don't like. They don't like the individual identity, the minority of one. They don't like the national identity. They treat nationalism actually as a virtual synonym for fascism. And they highlight the racial and the gender identities. And those identities become supreme, even though I think in people's lives, they're not necessarily supreme at all.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We're all multifaceted human beings. And it's interesting, too, because it's like the left actually wants you to think with the identity that is the most easily for them to victimize, right? So they don't want you to think of yourself as a Christian, even though a majority of the Black community is. They don't want you to think of yourself as you said, a nationalist, because that's a dirty word. And, you shouldn't love your country that much, apparently. And it really just exposes them for who they are. They want people to see themselves as victims. They want you to associate yourself more so with slavery as a Black person than Black Wall Street. They want you to associate yourself as a victim of bigotry if you are gay, but not anything else, not a person of triumph. It's so interesting that, we're just coming out of Black History Month. I really find it so interesting that they love to talk and reduce Black history to nothing more than slavery and Jim Crow and segregation, when there are tons of stories of Black triumph, throughout American history. Those stories would actually give Black people hope, Dinesh. So they don't talk about those stories. And again, it just shows that what they're doing is actually quite malicious and quite nefarious. And it's why I've been such an outspoken opponent of critical race theory, because I think to teach young Black children that regardless of how hard they try, how hard they work, they will always be Black in America, they will always be oppressed in America, is the actual opposite of what education is supposed to do. Education is supposed to cultivate leaders, cultivate, people who can have some ingenuity about themselves, have some ambition. Telling someone that regardless of how hard they work and how hard they try, that they will never, ever, ever achieve anything does not create leaders, does not create victors. All it does is perpetuate victimhood.
Let's take a quick pause. We'll be right back with CJ Pearson. If you're a business owner, look, you did the right thing and the tough thing during COVID. You paid your people and pulled your business through the pandemic. And now doing the tough thing could qualify you for up to $26,000 per employee at covidtaxrelief.org. Government funds are available to reward companies with 2 or more employees that stayed open during COVID. This is not a loan, and you don't have to pay it back. This program is complicated, but nobody knows more about it than the CPAs and tax experts at covidtaxrelief.org. You pay nothing up front. They do all the work and share a percentage of the cash that they get you. Businesses of all types, including nonprofits and churches, can qualify, including those who took PPP loans, even if you had increases in sales. You did the tough thing for your employees during COVID. Let covidtaxrelief.org help get you up to $26,000 per employee. Visit covidtaxrelief.org. That's covidtaxrelief.org.